Hello, and welcome to the Dyslexia Explored Podcast. I'm Darius Namdaran, your host with Joe.
Hi, everyone.
So today we are going to talk about an interesting dyslexia journey that's ended up with building a dyslexia screener and also an everything screener in the future, especially in the UK, starting in the UK. I've got an interesting person to introduce you today, Jamie Wace. He started working in a company in China and doing trade and so on as an intern. He's been a tech consultant, and then he decided to actually build his own screener and start solving this problem with a sprinkling of AI, I think, as well. And he's also got his own pod with the CEO of the British Dyslexia Association. Jamie, it's really great to have you here on the pod. Good to hear your story.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, that's great. And what a brilliant and diverse route to get to where we are today. We were just saying that's how you can tell someone with dyslexia. They've taken the most brilliant route to get to where they currently are.
Unexpected,
yeah. It definitely feels, it feels random, but maybe there's some kind of line that you could draw through all of it.
Yeah, it's never as random as it looks on the outside. So start us off. Well, first of all, what we'll do is give us a quick snapshot of where you are right now, okay? And then we'll do a trip back to where everything began with you, your discovery of dyslexia, and then bring folk back to where you are now, and then we'll move forward because you've got a lot going on right now and a lot of interesting stuff to discover. So quick snapshot, where are you right now? What do you do?
So in terms of where I am right now, I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Talamo. And Talamo basically exists or has existed to solve a problem, which is that 80% of dyslexic school kids are not diagnosed by the time they leave school. We felt like this was in large part because there's just not enough assessors or educational psychologists to ever meet the demand of children who needed to be assessed. And also, it's just very expensive. So if you're a child from a lower socioeconomic area and your parents are not kind of your big advocate, a lot of the time you'll slip through the cracks, and then you can see the societal impact on kind of the prison system or exclusion rates or mental health problems. And so we felt that there was an interesting opportunity for technology to come in and to help, at least not necessarily solve the whole problem, but certainly solve part of the problem. So we felt that we could create a really accurate and actionable and useful dyslexia screener, which isn't a formal diagnosis, but it's a much more affordable way of just seeing whether or not you think a child has got dyslexia. We launched this after kind of building it for quite some time in September 2024. And now we're in about 850 schools. And we are just on the precipice for, as you mentioned, launching a couple of new tests. So one for executive functioning and another one for maths ability and dyscalculia. So yeah, that's a bit of a snapshot of where we are today.
Fantastic overview. Thank you, Jamie. So take us back. What was life like before you discovered you had dyslexia?
So I think for me, obviously because I didn't really realize what was the problem, I just viewed myself as just pretty unintelligent. I think I was a very sort of late bloomer, I guess, academically speaking. And I came from a family, my parents are both journalists. And I think naturally there's always just a kind of assumed level of literacy and grammar and all of those types of things. And I have two very academic siblings as well. So when I was sort of in primary school, I definitely felt like I was kind of the black sheep of the family. And I felt like I was kind of the one who'd never really got things properly or wasn't really performing at the level that people would expect. But also, I just didn't really engage in school. I think part of it was the fact that I obviously found reading and writing difficult. So I think I just sort of tuned out for a lot of my early schooling. And that kind of sort of continued through to early secondary. I played a lot of sport, which helped. I think that kind of helped keep some of my self-esteem intact. But then I was just basically bottom sets for everything. And then I came up to the age just before taking my GCSEs. So I was around 15. So I think I was about a year out from taking my GCSEs. And I got a diagnosis of dyslexia. And I think it was probably, I hear a lot about dyslexic people naturally as they get older and start to pick their own subjects. And they've kind of got over a large part of the reading trouble. And so they can start to apply some of their skills to other areas, that it tends to not be as sort of acute by the time you get to 15, 16 anyway. But I think that it sort of dovetailed nicely with understanding what my brain was like. And I think in particular for me, it meant that I could kind of separate my brain from my like personality and who I was. And so I understood what having a poor working, I think I basically just called it memory at this point, but a working memory at that point was. And I knew that I was kind of slower at reading and spelling. And I think that was the sort of beginning of the journey of me trying to understand more about my academia. And then by the time I did my GCSEs, I got some tutor help and basically just, I did really well. And it was a complete inversion of what I should have got based on the sets I was in and basically my whole schooling up until that point. And this produced basically an inversion of what I would have expected to get as per my sets. So it was a bit of a surprise, a happy surprise. And I felt, I think, a little cheated when I got those results because I felt like I could have been academic beforehand, but I felt like I hadn't been able to up until the age of 16 when I got those results. So yeah, I think when I reflect on my schooling, certainly up until that age, it's bittersweet.
So tell us what the wake-up call was. Was it a person that identified you? Was it your parents? Because it's always interesting to figure out what was that wake-up moment.
I think my mum she was always kind of worried about me she always is, as all mums are. And I think that she could see that I wasn't necessarily really slow, but there was obviously just something that wasn't quite clicking with the schoolwork. And so I think that produced a sort of inquiry. And I think what triggered this, I believe, were some access arrangements for exams. And then when we had the access arrangements, it was then going into a formal assessment because you could see in some of the standardized assessments I did for the access arrangement test that then produced the dyslexia diagnosis. But even having the access arrangements test, my mum was involved in that process. And so that's why I feel very lucky because like that, I basically had an advocate, like a parental advocate, and that was what got me support. And
Isn't that interesting that you did a test in school that helped trigger you discovering you had dyslexia?
Exactly. So, I mean, the whole point is that what we're trying to do is try to help more kids discover what I was lucky enough to discover, but making it more sort of democratic, as it were.
Jo.
Yeah, I think it's always that there's always a seed. I mean, we're joking about how random the journey is, but actually the seed was there, wasn't it? I mean, that's fascinating that there was testing for sort of access arrangements and exams, and then that threw something up. And it's like you say, the sooner children know, the bigger the impact. We've got two daughters, one who found out in primary school when she was 7 that she was dyslexic, again, because it was a primary school teacher that said to us, think we might need to just check out if she's dyslexic. And then our youngest didn't find out, very similar to you actually, Jamie. Yeah, she failed her prelims and then found out between the prelims and actually taking her Nat 5s as it is up here in Scotland. And the difference is quite massive, but it's both cases were dependent on an adult being able to say, actually, I think we need to intervene at this point. There's a specific pain point. So the gift of Talamo, I guess, is you're screening entire classes almost with no sort of pre-expectation of who will or won't be dyslexic. It's not triggered by, I think I might need to check this child out, which is such a great leveler, because I'm thinking that everybody we speak to, almost without exception, says it's the otherness of feeling different to your peers and to your classmates, to doing things differently. And yet to just be screened as a class, and I've seen some of your videos of Talamo, it looks like great fun as well. So it's not hard for the children. It's a fun activity. I mean, getting screen time
before we
school
get into
is great. So
before we get into Talamo conversation, which I really want to do, I'm very keen to keep on track in terms of what did you feel was your biggest challenge with dyslexia personally?
Yeah, I think because I got diagnosed quite late, I think that when children get diagnosed earlier, it tends to be reading and spelling, which is the really debilitating point. And it normally then it's then sort of 7 to 12 where it's most acute, because when the class has moved on from learning the fundamental building blocks of language, the dyslexic child is still struggling with that. And that's the kind of the cliff at which like the rest of the kids are able to do things with other subjects with the reading, and the dyslexic child's just trying to keep up to try and get the reading down. So I think I went through that process, but obviously I kind of had to just deal with that on my own. And I think, but by the time I got to 15, that I've sort of one way or another got myself there with the reading and spelling. It wasn't perfect, but at least I could kind of get through it. But I think the thing that I found the most debilitating, and still definitely do now, and you can ask any of my family or my wife or anything, is the working memory challenge. Because I think that is the one that, I mean, if you've got messy handwriting, poor spelling, it's not great. But I think this is the one that, unless you know and have been told by an expert that this is an actual problem, you're just going to internalize that as just something that you do. And for me, it's about kind of being forgetful, just having kind of a very sort of narrow stream of information that can be taken in at one point. I'm sort of a bit like, I'm not a very good multitasker, but I'm very focused when I get into something. And I think for me, that was the thing that stuck out on the profile, as also being like very low. And so I think for me, it was really interesting to see that, because it meant that I took notes in a different way. It meant that I reviewed things a lot more. It meant that I did a lot more kind of audio visual. It's funny, my mum was pushing me right onto mind maps, and I sort of really took to mind maps. So when it came to my exams, I just had mind maps for absolutely everything. And I would think about those mind maps when I got into the exam. So I do think that this is a nice sort of, ever since I first saw ivvi, I thought this is a great tool, because it combines two things together, which is that a lot of dyslexic people are quite good visually, but have a poor working memory, and also often have messy handwriting and can't take good notes. And so that was definitely me all over. And so I think, even today, just because I know that I've got a poor working memory, it's still really annoying. I still like forget my keys all the time, still kind of need to have like these note taker tools and all the rest of it. It's definitely the thing that's most debilitating. And also strategies only get you so far, because you're still kind of stuck with it. But I would say that had I not known that this is just a kind of a standalone cognitive profile thing, and it's not me just being lazy, meant that I'd stop kind of berating myself as much about it. And it would mean that kind of mentally I would spiral less about when my poor working memory is exposed in a particular area, and I'd feel really bad about it. Having said that, there still is that aspect, there still is that kind of self-esteem point where if it's sort of like, it feels like I can't do something that loads of other people can, there's still that part of me that has to really fight to be like, it's fine. Just don't worry about it. Like, this is just, this is okay.
That was definitely a game changer for us as well when we had our youngest assessed for dyslexia, because she has a working memory of, I think it's three items. And honestly, the amount of stress there was in our household, because we'd be trying to leave the house and I'd be saying things like, can you go and put your shoes on, get your coat on, brush your hair and clean your teeth? I don't know, 4 items. And of course, what people don't realize with working memory is once you've passed your capacity, it's not that you remember the first 3 and then you forget the 4th. It's like it wipes, it's all gone. And I'm not dyslexic. And actually, it was so helpful for me to realize that, because I knew that if I was exceeding a working memory, I had to write it down, or as she got older, I had to text her, or we had little checklists places. So, for everyone listening who's thinking like, what is working memory, or how does it work? It's essentially how many items of information you can kind of hold without sort of filling up the memory banks a little bit. And so I totally get when you say like understanding the working memory was a bit of a game changer.
Yeah, could you explain how you understand working memory, Jamie? It's just sometimes nice to hear different people's explanation of it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I sometimes go to the sort of the technical definition around like the RAM on your computer, where you've got too many tabs open at once and then the whole thing crashes. I'd say that's probably the best version of it. I mean, it depends, because for me, it manifests itself in different ways. Like, I don't know if all of these things are related, but I think that it's interesting because it doesn't seem like my medium term or long term memory are affected by it, but it will just be that I've been told things and I just simply can't remember at all. So things like the locker at the gym, like now when I go to the gym, I'll just go like this, loads and loads of times just to try and get some sort of multi-sensor. Oh, I just remembered you can't see what I'm doing. But basically, I put my hand in front of my face over and over again to just like take a sort of mental note of the locker that I've got. And so, yeah, I would describe it as just having a very small amount of processing until you forget something. So you've just got a very narrow window instead of other people who I know who are just able to just remember so much stuff that you could give them a 9 digits and they'd be able to recall it for you 6 hours later.
Great. Okay, so give us a quick hop, skip, and a jump from where you were at school to kind of starting Talamo.
Yeah, so that was, I think we left off with my GCSEs. After that, I did my A-levels. I then went to Newcastle University to study politics. And when I was at Newcastle, I did a module on Chinese politics, which I felt was really interesting. And I was just very curious about China in general, because I felt like China, I mean, completely different from what I'm doing now, but I felt like China in particular had a lot of really interesting things that had happened, like the Cultural Revolution, but it was still in living memory. And I felt very sort of compelled to go and live in China for at least a period of time, to go and meet some of these people who'd been through this crazy kind of transformational event in society. So after I finished my undergraduate, I went traveling around South America for a while and then got a scholarship to study Mandarin at a Chinese university. And I think there was also a part of me that found languages extremely difficult at school because of my dyslexia, that I just wanted to go and prove to myself, to some fictional person, that it was possible for me. So I sort of threw myself into studying Mandarin and then got an internship at the British Chamber of Commerce. And this was post-Brexit, so they were doing a lot of kind of repositioning for kind of British businesses in China, so writing position papers and things like that. But all the while I was living with a Chinese family as well in a homestay, just really trying to nail down the Chinese. And probably for about, I mean, I was there for 2 years, and every morning, every evening, I'd have a Chinese lesson every single day. I would review hundreds of characters every single day. And there's definitely parts of the language which I found extremely difficult, particularly because there's like, it's a tonal language, so lots of things sound very similar. But I actually found the characters much simpler to understand because they're sort of pictorial. And so I made it a real kind of point of studying Mandarin. I was just determined to get it. And I had lots of friends who kind of picked it up much more easily, but I was still just extremely determined just to follow it. And even kind of 2 years after I got back from China, I was still studying, doing an online lesson every day, just really kind of dedicated to doing it. And eventually learned, I did all the books for HSK 5. I mean, it's a bit rusty now, but basically did get to a pretty good level of Mandarin. But I think it was actually quite an inefficient use of time because I'm naturally not a very good language learner, but it was more of a kind of a proving to myself that I could do it. From there, I then went to the London School of Economics and did a master's degree in Chinese. And then I got a job as a service design strategist. So basically, we're sort of designing, it was a really cool job, actually. We basically were working with kind of clients like Nike or Helly Hansen or Real Madrid to basically build them sort of apps and services, just at the time when kind of it was fashionable for these types of brands to produce their own apps. So worked on things like the Nike Running Club and Nike Training Club and all of these kind of digital experiences. And I think for me, it felt a little bit like entrepreneurship, but sort of without the risk. And it was kind of, you didn't get to control the whole thing, but I think there was enough there where I thought I wanted to do something entrepreneurial. So sort of just started learning a bit more about dyslexia. And I listened to this book by, I think it was Roy Davis, called The Gift of Dyslexia. And that was the first time I've ever heard someone reframe dyslexia as potentially not a negative. And I thought that was just an interesting thought because I always kind of viewed my dyslexia as just, it couldn't be viewed any other way other than negative. Like there was just no way in my brain that I could conceive of something like that. And I think that even though I don't probably agree fully with the thesis quite as kind of like devoutly as I did when I first read that book, which was basically that you have the dyslexia is a gift, and if you work your brain in a particular way, you can basically just never have to worry about any of the things you had to before, and it's like a superpower. I sort of got a slightly revised view on what I think about that. But certainly at the time, it was really interesting. And that began a bit of a process of understanding more about the dyslexia space, kind of speaking to lots of dyslexia assessors, understanding more about it.
Give us an idea of when that time was. How long ago was that? 6 years ago? 5 years ago?
So this was probably in 2022. So yeah, actually end of 2021.
5 years ago.
5 years ago, yeah. And I was working with this guy on a project who was also dyslexic, like just at work. And then just for some reason, we just worked quite close quarters. And we spoke just a lot about dyslexia, and then just kind of did a bit of a mapping exercise of lots of different opportunities in the dyslexia space. He then was kind of not as interested in taking the project further, but there's a couple of colleagues that I worked with who were. So actually my co-founders were my kind of ex-colleagues. And one of them found this statistic that 80% of dyslexic school kids are not diagnosed by the time they leave school. And we then set about making a product or raising money to build a product for a platform so assessors could conduct more assessments, just because we felt it would be too ambitious to try and automate anything. And actually, weirdly, really early on, it was through Matt Hancock, who at the time was very interested in dyslexia. I saw him talking about this on TV, and I have to say, it's a time where he wasn't as kind of the headline associated with him was not probably the headline that it is today. And he was very interested in dyslexia, and he wanted to look at the idea of a universal dyslexia screener. And so I messaged his team saying, oh, we're interested in this space. And he invited me to Parliament for a roundtable discussion. And so before we'd even ever had a product or anything like that, or even a kind of a whisper of a product, I was sitting around the table with all the kind of the top brass of the dyslexia community. And I just felt like afterwards, it just seemed so obvious that there was a need for an automated version. So to kind of cut a long story short, the time we raised some money. I was kind of working part-time, or I was working full-time at another job, along with one of my co-founders. And I'd actually shared the wrong presentation deck by mistake, and actually shared one about Talamo at the time. And my boss at the time was like, sorry, can't help but notice that you've just shared a presentation that's got you and another person who also works at the company for something completely different.
Oh, so you shared in the company that you were working with,
yes,
your own sort of side project as a deck, and exactly. Now you're getting into trouble.
Well, it kind of turned into a sort of live pitch, because the people who were quite cool, like they were quite sort of, I mean, I wonder how I would have felt had it happened the other way around, but they were quite cool about it. And they basically pitched to them, and their original take was, why don't we try and do this through the company? It was encouraging, but it was all kind of, it didn't quite work out. But one of them came on board as our first investor, which was really cool. And she's dyslexic herself, and her kids are dyslexic. And it's a quite nice sort of story that kind of, even though they should have just been like, you're sacked, which is sacked me for something else while on the job. It's definitely a breach of my contract. But no, they were very supportive. And then we went full time to work on this screener, and having known basically nothing about really how it worked, it then sort of began like a long journey to try and figure out how to actually make one of these tools.
So when did that start? When did you get the fund? And can you tell us numbers and things like that?
Yeah, so this would have all kicked off when we went full time at the beginning of 2023. So that's when my co-founder and I went full time, and we're like, okay, we need to figure this out. And we essentially had raised enough money to have a small salary each for a year, and enough to hire the team who's going to build the platform. And I mean, shock horror, we took way longer to do it than we first thought. And I think the kind of, I guess the subtext of this was that at the time, I think a lot of people were saying that it's not possible to create a screener which has got any degree of accuracy. And I can understand why they said that, because it was actually really difficult. Like the problem is that from a business perspective, it's like a really hard business to kind of just get started and released quickly, because you need so much data before you can even prove that it's valid in the first place. And so we built the first version of the platform. I think it took us about 6 months. And then we went into our first data collection. And obviously you have to work completely around the school year for the first data collection. And I think we must have tested it on about 800 kids, and then basically came back and the results were pretty inconclusive. And then we knew that, okay, we just have to go again. Like, we have to just go again. And so we then got another, I think, 900 kids, and it started with entirely new tests. So we completely redid all of the tests. And then it started to show a better degree of accuracy. So we released it to parents, and then we realized pretty quickly that actually this is much better for this to live as a schools product. But then obviously it becomes so much more complicated to build a schools product. This is also pre kind of AI development as well. So then it was another 6 months before we then had all of the kind of functionality that a school would need to sort of operationalize this at like a cohort scale. And so that took us to, I think it was, September 24 when we sort of launched properly to schools. And since then it's not been a kind of a smooth sailing, but it does seem that schools are getting good use of it. They're enjoying using it. I mean, we've rebuilt the platform since then. And I feel like as we go through the months, it just gets iteratively better. We kind of understand more, as both of you well know, what it's like kind of running a technology business. But it seems like we've been getting good feedback. And now it's all about kind of expanding the remit of moving beyond just dyslexia.
One of the things I have to ask you about when we talk about investment into a business is you nailed Simon Squibb, which was hats off to you. So for anyone who's listening who doesn't know, Simon Squibb, he pops up on social media and he'll run up to people in the street and say, do you have a dream? And then if they have a dream, he'll often resource it or help them. And I just remember you putting a video up on LinkedIn going, I'm going to connect with Simon Squibb. That's what I'm going to do. And then LinkedIn and the algorithm, you don't always see every bit of the journey. And then the next video I see is you're in front of Simon Squibb pitching Talamo. Now there has to be a story in there. How did it go?
Yeah, I think dyslexia is kind of an interesting space in the sense that like there's a lot of celebrities who have dyslexia.
Oh.
So we tried to use it as a bit of our strategy for fundraising to try and get kind of famous names in the tent. I always felt like Simon Squibb would be a good one because he's quite outspoken about being dyslexic, and he kind of wants people to come up to him and basically ask for stuff. And I actually had quite a few interactions, a few semi-interactions with him previously where I tried to pitch him live. I tried to track him down and live pitch him. But obviously everyone has the same idea. So there was like a screening event for Jamie Oliver's documentary. He was there. I managed to get in a lift with him, and he was just obviously like getting a bit of downtime. He really didn't want to hear it at all. And then I think I just wanted to see, I'd heard of a friend of mine who had a friend who got investment, and he'd done a similar thing where it basically just did a video online to say like, okay, Simon Squibb, we want you to invest in us. Like, what do we need to do? And I asked my friend to forward it on to his team. And so I posted it on LinkedIn, and Simon Squibb actually commented, and he said, go to the doorbell. And he has this doorbell of dreams.
Oh yeah, I've heard of the doorbell. I've seen it. Yeah.
And then he did that, and he kind of unlocked the next stage of the quest.
Could you just describe the doorbell, please, for those who don't know what the doorbell is?
So the doorbell of dreams is basically like it is a physical doorbell that I think he has two. So he has one that's in South London somewhere, he bought a stairwell, I think just a random stairwell, and you're supposed to click the doorbell, and it's like a Ring doorbell camera that then connects to his team that are based somewhere, and they'll review your pitch and decide whether or not they want to help you in some way, essentially. He teamed up with Richard Branson, and he had a doorbell at the Virgin Hotel in Shoreditch. And so I went to that one, pitched the doorbell, and nothing happened. And actually I was with another group of people who they had like huge cardboard cutouts of Simon Squibb and Richard Branson. And I knew they'd ignored me because they commented saying, oh, can you bring those to an event that we're having tonight? We'd really like to see those. So I was like, okay, you don't really care much about what my thing is, but you do care about the big cutouts. But then I learned that they were having an event that night. So then I went to the event, and then there I managed to meet the team. And then later on, they said that they were having this festival and they wanted to have a pitching competition at the festival. And then one of his team then eventually said, do you want to be part of the pitching competition? And then that led me to go on stage with him. And then it was basically like a Dragon's Den style pitch. So yeah, that's a bit of a long story, but yeah, it kind of, we got there in the end, but there's quite a lot of stories that I've got for celebrities that I didn't manage to get off the top despite trying very hard.
What happened? Just the finale. What actually happened at the end of all that pitching?
So I was pitching to not just Simon, but was pitching to a guy called Nick Pritchard, who's kind of quite a well-known, he's also dyslexic, but a well-known entrepreneur. There was a guy called Daniel Priestley, and then there was also a lady called Amelia Sordell. And Simon, he invested like 25 grand in us. And then we also got investment from one of the others. So another 25 grand. And then Amelia gave us like a free kind of marketing accelerator, which was also quite cool. So it was really interesting. But like, I think there was also the fact that it was a judging panel. They were sort of kind of geeing each other on a little bit. So I think we got more because there was a bit of that collective and they were in front of this crowd. So I think we were quite lucky in that regard.
Yeah. So they had to do something sort of thing.
Okay,
right.
But for all that feels like a strong story, a long story, or perhaps a convoluted route, I also think it's just an absolutely fabulous demonstration of the sort of tenacity, I think, that often comes with dyslexia. That's just sort of like, okay, fresh problem to solve, plot twist, let's regroup. There's just that ability to sort of twist and turn with all the sort of the convolutions in the route to get there and just go, I'm not giving up. I've got a plan and I'm going to keep going. So a massive kudos for doing that. It's just brilliant.
I actually have another story which is a little bit like that. We had Octopus, like the Octopus Energy.
Yeah.
So the founder of Octopus Energy, he basically found out about Talamo because one of our investors works at Octopus and who's a really great guy called Ed Keelan, and he does a lot for sort of dyslexia space.
I think we've had Ed on the podcast. Yeah, Ed's been on the podcast.
Oh yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
So Ed basically put us in touch with this guy called Simon Rogerson, and we then kind of went through the process of whether or not the Octopus venture capital firm would invest in us, and it basically just turned out that they basically said they would, but it turned out that it probably wasn't the best deal for us, but also probably for them as well. And for whatever reason, it didn't work out. And Simon Rogerson, he's a serious dude. And I feel like it ended, obviously it's never a nice thing for it to end. Both sides have put in like invested time and there's always the risk that people view it in a certain way. But he sort of left the door ajar. And then a year later, I basically just messaged him saying, like, we did what we said we were going to do. How about you coming on our cap table instead of it just being through Octopus? And he was just like, he basically just was like, responded like, yes. And that was it. And then he just sort of, he essentially just asked for what the bank details were. It was the most like, it was such a, I mean, I hope one day I'm successful enough to be able to be so casual about that kind of thing. But it was really cool. It was a kind of a nice full circle moment because it felt like a real kind of loss when we didn't get the Octopus deal. Then he came on later on. And I do just sort of, to the point that you're sort of making before, Joe, I think maybe it's a dyslexic point that you kind of think that sort of, it makes sense, like that they would want to, it makes sense that you can kind of have a go or sort of like push a door and maybe a little open kind of thing. So I feel like maybe that's kind of one of those things that I'll at least try and give it a go. And also, it is just a bit of a game at the end of the day as well. Like it is a bit of fun. And I think it's trying to sort of take it a bit less seriously and be like, okay, what can we do here? Recently we tried to get hold of Carol Warderman for our maths test, but no, got in touch with the team and she sadly wasn't interested.
So what do you think are your advantages? We've looked at some of the disadvantages, and we've also looked at how you spent a lot of time trying to improve your weaknesses, especially with that Chinese exercise to prove yourself and so on. And with dyslexia, often we spend a lot of time trying to strengthen our weaknesses. But what about your strengths? What are your strengths? And tell us some stories about how you've worked on your strengths to strengthen your strengths.
Yeah, and it's an interesting point. I think I spent far too long in life trying to improve on my weaknesses and make something that I'm bad at and just become, instead of being really bad, I'm just quite bad at it. And I've realized that that's kind of a false economy and it's just a bit of a waste of time. I think probably what I'm good at is, I think there's probably like a lateral thinking aspect, and I don't know if it's related to dyslexia. And I think that it's kind of applicable in lots of different scenarios. I think one of them is like communication. And so I think trying to sort of understand, like trying to think of the perspective of someone else, like really, really trying to get into their shoes and thinking like, what would they actually want and what are they trying to achieve? So I always try to think of things like, I think it's kind of stating the obvious that everyone would normally try to think about what somebody would want, but I really try and think like, what would they be? Like, for example, with Simon Squibb, like, what does he actually want? Like, what is good? What is good for him? Like, what is a good outcome? What is going to be annoying for him to see? Or what is actually just something that's going to be like an easy, quick win? Just be like, yeah, I could do that. And I could position myself as him thinking like, what would he actually just want to sign off? Like if that came into his inbox. And so I think there's that aspect of it. I also think there's a kind of looking at something that kind of seems unrelated, but then kind of taking sort of tangential points from something and applying it somewhere else. I don't know if you feel like this as well, Darius, but it might be that you can kind of see, it's like you're kind of stealing ideas, but it's just like, but you're sort of taking it from you're sort of just re-skinning it in a different way and thinking like, and I don't really know how to describe it, but it's kind of like you can sort of see the skeleton of something and you can be like, oh, that could fit quite well over here.
Yeah.
But that's what if you feel that you've got a similar skill.
Well, I think have you read the book Dyslexic Advantage? Listened to that book yet?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's one of the big skills in there as well. I think often people with dyslexia feel very comfortable sitting in the overlap of 2 or 3 different disciplines, maybe even 3 or 4, and they sit in that overlap and they hear what's happening in the world of AI, for example, and then they hear what's happening in the world. I feel like I'm listening in the world of AI. I'm listening in the world of mind mapping. I'm listening in the world of education, executive function. I've got an executive function podcast, for example, and you see what seems completely obvious to you, and that's why you called it stealing. It's not actually stealing in that it's just transferring a pattern that's working in this environment, and then you could see that that pattern or process could even work in another environment no one's ever thought of. It's what scientists do really well as well, and that's why so many people with dyslexia are amazing, make scientific breakthroughs. But yeah, it's a biggie. Yeah.
Well, I think you describe it as a zero gravity brain, don't you? So it's like there's so many concepts and ideas sort of floating around, and you're sort of able to pull different ones down and make connections. And it's that sense of something over there connected to something over here. And it's those connections and that innovative way of looking at things that's very different. I have a very high gravity brain, so everything's kind of like on the table for me. And so I'm very sort of like very linear in how I think of things. So it's fascinating to see the connections and the lateral, like you're saying, Jamie, feeling like you're going off at a tangent, but actually pulling a connection together and making something out of that. It's brilliant.
I feel like as Talamo's grown as a kind of a company, we're still a very small company, but we've got like 10 people now. And I feel like in the beginning, it was okay because I could sort of go off and I could just sort of like just keep just going really deep on something that I couldn't really explain why I was kind of just doing something that seemed like super irrelevant because it just feels quite illogical. And now my diary is so filled up, like just all the time with kind of like things where you have to, there's like management type conversations, or there's just a lot of stuff going on. I'm quite a meandering type person. Like I think I do my best work when I've been able to sort of just like, I just not really do very much for 45 minutes. And then suddenly I just kind of hit a real vein of something I'm interested in. And then maybe it's actually completely irrelevant, or maybe it's actually something which is really cool. And I feel like this sort of, now that I've had to play a role which is more kind of standard operator, I found it quite challenging because there's kind of less time that's left for this kind of creativity. And it's been quite tricky to sort of work out, like, and now I actually have to be quite intentional about being like, okay, here's some creative time that I can just peel off separately. Yeah, but it feels harder to be kind of more creative within that kind of tight guardrail now.
Joe, you've got
Yeah.
some thoughts on this, don't you?
Well, I think obviously you've got a brilliant team at Talamo, but there's a Simon Sinek quote, and it basically says, I won't be able to remember it verbatim, but it's something about, it's when the visionary and the person who gets things done come together, that's when great things happen. And there is just no way I can get Darius into a strict regime of a diary of getting things done. But I really like getting things done. And so it's
You mean there's no way? You've done it very well. I think I'm doing very well. That's the thing. You think I'm not doing it very well. I think I'm doing it damn well.
Well, I
That's
think
the difference,
I think
isn't it? You know?
relative to sort of not doing it at all. But I feel your tension, Jamie. As things get busier, you have to get into a groove and you have to get into a momentum. And I guess what's worked for us at ivvi is building out a team that allows that sort of slightly visionary sort of, I had a novel idea and I've chased it down. And actually, well, almost without exception, those novel ideas have become really pivotal sort of moments for ivvi where we've developed them. But at the same time, it is just the sort of the day-to-day running. And I suppose even if people are listening to this and they've never run a business, if they've got dyslexia, they'll be feeling that tension of a mind that wants to think of 1,000,001 different things and fabulous creativity and innovation, and then just the sort of the life admin that we've all seen the memes about. I'm a bit tired of all the adulting. I'd like to not be the adult anymore. So.
Exactly. No, I think it's an interesting one. Like, I mean, my co-founders, we've got a completely different kind of brain type. That he lives in a kind of like project management software tool, and that's great. I love that he does that. I love it.
What is it? Cursor?
He just uses Jira all the time for everything. Or actually, to be honest, he uses Trello and Jira just so he'll manage.
Oh, in Jira. And okay, got you. So he's in this sort of task management.
Exactly, like giving people tasks, that kind of thing. And I love the fact that it's getting done, but I can't relate. I can never work on that. It's just like, it's just impossible for me. And it is hard because I think that, again, I don't know how you feel about this, Darius, but like, I think because as a dyslexic person, you're normally quite a good communicator and you can be quite convincing. And part of the reason why you've kind of managed to have some element of success because you managed to convince a lot of people. And I think then people think that it's red, that you're sort of like functioning at a certain level. But then actually, like, they're often then surprised at some of the basic stuff that you're just like not really able to do. It's quite hard as a sort of trying to be like a leader. And then there's also some quite basic stuff that you really struggle with. And I think people are a bit like, wait, hold on. You can't even, like, you've just forgotten that you're supposed to respond to that email. That's a bit weird. That's a bit random.
Yeah. I feel that a lot, Jamie. And I suppose I started working in the realm of dyslexia 10 years ago when my daughter started to crash and burn. And after that experience, we set our mission to teach 1 million children with dyslexia to mind map by 2030. We thought, well, that's 14 years away. We could manage it by then. We've got 4 years left. And the thing is, it wasn't until Joe really joined the mission in terms of the practical COO of ivvi that things really changed, like massively changed 2 years ago or 3 years ago. Joe's always been there, but she was doing her own thing as well. Now she's said, right, I'll come in and put my shoulder to the plow in terms of being the COO. And it's just been amazing. I'm so glad you've got that other guy, because if you don't have that, you're in trouble. But then I also know during that journey how many people with dyslexia cannot use a calendar, just cannot use a calendar, got no relation to the calendar. I've sat down and done workplace strategy coaching. People are super successful, earning 6-figure incomes more. And I'm like, how are you with the calendar? And they go, oh, I hate calendars. I can't do it. I'm like, it's all right. Most people with dyslexia have that experience. Let me just reframe it for you. A calendar is your book of promises. Do you like keeping to your promises? Yes, I do. Then every promise you make goes in that calendar and nothing else. Just promises. If you promise to take your kid and get an ice cream at 4 o'clock after school, you put it in the calendar. If you promise to go and drop them off or pick them up, if you promise to do something with your wife, if you promise to show up to a meeting, whatever, it goes in the calendar, nothing else. And if you want to keep your promises, you just go to that place. And then there's other techniques, like even the simple technique of when you set a calendar invite and a calendar thing and you click on it, and then you have to write the thing in, then you have to choose the time, and then you have to figure out, and it's just like, oh my goodness, I've just got lost already. Processing, overwhelmed. But if you go into calendar and if you see the window of the day and then you drag a box and you open that box and you go, yeah, that's roughly where it is. And then it's set and you're like, gosh. So you've gone from list view to visual view. It's transformative.
100%.
Speaking your language.
100%. It's why it's so annoying when you're on your phone to try and when you're booking meetings in, because it's you can do it on the Google Calendar, to be fair, but it's so much nicer when you've just got like even like a second screen. You can just look at the calendar and you just put it in on the week. It's weird. It's like, it's probably the only thing that I'm like pretty hot on, because like I know that I have to look at it in the morning. On the weekend, calendar goes out it completely goes out the window. But at least for working, and I do exactly the same thing, Darius. Look at it when it's on. The visual one is so much easier to look at. No, it's interesting. Book of Promises. I like that. It also kind of helps you focus the mind a bit in terms of like what's actually essential, because there's sort of, I guess there's part of it where you have to be like, as a CEO of a business, you have to be speaking to people. It's part of the role. Like you have to. But then it's like, you then also need to factor in like, what is the trade-off that you're making? And weirdly, I actually think now I try and put all meetings together. So like I'd much rather just do back to back. I'd just be like, okay, fine. A whole day is going to be meetings then, because I know that I'm not going to really be able to do any work in the kind of half an hour in between meetings. So I may as well just stack the deck and just put them all there. And then the following day, it can just be like, try as much to just have nothing, like nothing at all. And then kind of just go, because I imagine you're probably the same. You said so many things that I relate to a lot, where it's like you have sort of procrastination, but then once you get into the work, it's then extremely efficient and you're sort of just going from one thing to the next. But it sometimes takes a little bit of time to kind of warm up to then get into that headspace. That's definitely what I find. And sometimes you have those days where it's like you have sort of meetings that are spread out throughout the day. And it basically means that you're just like, it's really hard to get any work done, even if they're evenly spread out. It's just sort of, it's enough of a distraction that it kind of doesn't get, it takes you out of the flow state. Is what I find, at least.
Joe and I have a bit of a language about this, which is hunter and gatherer mode. So some people are hunters and some people are gatherers.
Or farmers.
Or farmers. So you've got the hunters and the farmers. Okay. And so there is a British researcher, gosh, I'm forgetting her name. She's done a thesis on this, that the dyslexic brain is much more wired towards the hunter mode, wide-angle thinking. Helen Taylor, that's it. Yeah. Is that the same Helen Taylor? That's not Helen. There's two Helens.
We had Helen Ross. Is that who
Helen
you're
Ross.
thinking? Helen was on the podcast.
That's
Helen
right.
Taylor.
So I've tried. I want to get Helen Taylor on the pod as well. But Helen Taylor talks about this hunter mindset. And I think sometimes as CEO, we need to be a hunter in terms of going out into a realm where there's maybe no opportunities, and then you hit upon an opportunity and you chase it down like you just did with the doorbell guy. And that's kind of
new strapline. The doorbell
guy. Yeah, I can't remember his name. Dyslexia. But then Joe sometimes, and I say to Joe, it's like, okay, I'm coming back from the hunt now. I'm going to come back. I'm going to bring it all back and we're going to set it all up. And then we're going to work out how we can farm this. So there's this combination between hunting and farming that needs to happen. Yeah. So both are happening at the same time.
Yeah, it's interesting. How are you when it comes to, I find that one of my weaknesses is that I can be a bit of a magpie, and I'll see something new and I'll be like, okay, we need to do that. And it's been a real kind of challenge to try and become much more focused, particularly because you don't necessarily know whether or not the thing that you're trying to go and get at is the next big thing that's going to change everything, or it's just a massive distraction. How do you find that? Like, how do you cope?
Well, first of all, I've got Joe. That helps a bit. But I've just been through this process just recently, Jamie, over the last 4 months. So 1st of November, I opened up Cursor, which is a AI coding app, and they started agentic coding with Cursor too. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is the first time I can create a pull request for ivvi all on my own. I've never properly coded before, and I could solve something. And then all weekend, I was like, right, this has been waiting in our product roadmap for like 3 months. Can I do this? I did this. I can do that. I did this. I did that. I did this. I did that. And these are all small trivial things that our developer has still to get round to because there's much more important things for him to do. But I nailed them. And this was like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. But to do it, I started to need some of my notes. And all of my notes were in proprietary formats, like Apple Notes or something else. And I'm like, everything had to go into Markdown. I had to pull everything into Markdown so the AI could read it. And that's when I had a kind of epiphany moment. I'm like, oh my goodness, every ivvi map has to be Markdown. And Markdown is the new database for the next era. It's like, we've got it in JSON, we've got it in our own mind mapping database, and an AI can read through an ivvi mind map. If you don't export it as mind map, you can export it as mind map. You can export it as a Word document, fine. But what I realized was what the AI really wants to do is just read the source document directly, no exporting, nothing, read what it needs, use it as context, and if needs be, rewrite it so it shows up on my mind map updated, but not within ivvi, but just within the source file. And I'm like, that's where the future is going. And we're doing all of it. Goes like, right, we need to do the BET award video and things like that. And I'm like, oh gosh, yes, we've got to do that. We don't have time, but we did it and we made the video and then we won the BET awards in January. But none of that would have happened if it wasn't Joe saying, we've got to be doing this, we've got to be doing that, we've got to be doing this. And we did it. But while all that's going on, I'm kind of like, Markdown, Markdown, Markdown. And then I've kind of got used to, now that I'm 50 odd years old, 56, you're 30,
You're just old.
I've kind of learned how many times I've totally effed up things in my life by just jumping on these things. I've said, okay, you're allowed to mull on this, but you're not taking action on it yet. And you're not going to say to your developer, this is what's going to happen, even though you feel so much conviction because you've felt that conviction before and it's not being quite on the money. And sometimes you know something really needs to happen, but you're not always sure in what time frame. So it might be a 10-year plan, not like a 6-month plan. And you're acting like it's a 6-month plan, but it's actually something that you need to do over 10 years or 3 years or whatever. So often I'm good on the hunch, but I'm not good on the time frame. So I just give myself more time. And if it grows and grows, then good. If it fades away, then I have lots of good ideas, and you probably have lots of good ideas. And the key is to kill good ideas and only keep great ideas. And if you don't kill the good ideas, you don't get to the great ideas. So the way you kill the good idea is just by letting it
Marinate,
stand on its own.
Yeah.
And if it keeps growing, if it's got enough momentum, instead of me giving it momentum, if it's got enough growth in it and so on as an idea in the back of my mind, then okay, it could be a great idea. But if it's not, it'll turn into a good idea and fade away.
yeah.
And then I had my advisors. I went to the AI Accelerator advisors, and there was the head of, in Edinburgh University, the head of the AI supercomputer sat down. Then the AI entrepreneurial in residence, and then another expert. And it was amazing to have this architecture review, code architecture review. And I sat down and I said, guys, the only thing I want from this 1 hour is to know if I'm crazy or not. That's all. Just tell me if I'm crazy or not. And I shared them my Markdown idea. And they were like, at the beginning, they were like, It's a bit odd, really odd. I've not shared the whole idea with you here, so it doesn't make sense yet. And then at the end of it, I said, look, all I want to know is, am I crazy? And they were like, you are definitely not crazy. This is amazing. And this is amazing. One of them was like, actually, you've gone to the next level in terms of investability. And I'm like, thank goodness I'm not crazy on this. And sometimes you need other people to just, that are on your level of wavelength, that are big picture thinkers and so on, to say, there's something not right about this. And do you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's interesting because from a tech perspective, I mean, I feel like sometimes I joke that I've got like very managed expectations. And that's because we've sort of sometimes taken like a long time to do things because it takes so long to collect the data and all of this kind of thing. And sometimes what I've been guilty of in the past is in the interim, I'm thinking of like, because things are not happening as quickly as I'd like them, I would then start thinking of all of these kind of crazy other things that are sort of like distracting. And then it means that then that kind of feeds into the rest of the team and it's just a bit of a chaotic environment. And now I think I've kind of just sort of made my peace with, even though that AI is kind of changing everything, it means you can develop things quicker. I think what I've sort of actually quite enjoyed is that like I've had to almost like I've been given kind of quite tight confines in terms of where I can be creative, because we're producing these new tests and it's had to be, we basically could only have chosen to do a couple of new tests and we had to choose really carefully what areas we're going to do them in, because we'll then have to find 1,000 kids to test it out on and then probably another 500. And then you have to go through this process. So it's basically like, it's like the most waterfall, not to use a kind of too much of a tech term, but like it's the most waterfall tech approach you can possibly imagine, which basically means that you sort of have to plan things ahead and it takes months and months and months. And so what I've tried to learn to do is just to sort of like try and deploy my creativity in a way that's not really disruptive in this process, which is not, okay, let's go and throw loads more features on the dev team for them to do immediately afterwards. And instead be like, okay, well, how can I just package what we've got and sell it as best as I possibly can without having to sort of create extra work? And I can kind of do it in a silo on my own. And then it's like, well, and how can I like plan as much stuff, which is still in the confines that I've been given? So in a way, I think for me, I'm trying to get I think actually it's quite nice sometimes to be given these guardrails where I then write, okay, you can be creative, but within this tight arena, and that's it until the next thing's released, and then you can kind of go on to the next piece. I kind of feel like for us, it's like I'll set the overall vision and basically decide what we want to do long term. And then in terms of the actual, like how that happens logistically, that's no longer my responsibility. Like that will be kind of figured out and be put into tickets. And it's kind of like, I shouldn't really meddle a huge amount with how that happens because it's just very disruptive. So I'm just like, okay, fine. That's your thing. We'll come back in and track product strategy in another 3 or 4 months. And for now, use the creativity to try and use it for marketing instead.
But
What's your take, Joe?
Well, but I think there is that element of the CEO role is the chief vision officer as well. And it's kind of, I mean, we've divided it between Darius as CEO and I'm COO, but I mean, we run it together. We're co-founders. There's not a hierarchical distinction. I think there's just a sort of brain type distinction. That's kind of how we see it. But I think there is that thing of, if we bring all the analogies together of like the hunter and the farmer and the seeking the vision, it is like the CEO goes out and hunts for the future vision, because a farmer can produce a really steady harvest, and a good farmer will get a harvest year on year, but a harvest tends to be either a sustainable yield or a very slowly incremental yield. And it's what that dyslexic visionary brain that isn't afraid to go into the future and pull it back into the present really brings to the table, because you're not afraid of how big it is, or not discouraged by how big it is or how implausible it is, because that's secondary to the fact that it could be possible, not is it possible. Possibility doesn't become a limiting factor. And I think that's a real gift for anybody to have in their business, to have that level of creative visionary thinking that is going and pulling an idea back into the present. But then it's then letting the people who are the farmers, who are in the present. So like you say, Jamie, you have the big ideas and the big vision, and then it's letting the team crack on with it and not going, oh, I've had another idea on how we could do that idea. It's learning the sort of, where's the handover? And I think, I mean, that's something we're always working on. And I mean, when Darius says we figured out that sort of agentic AI component and worked on it all weekend, he does mean all weekend. And I'm like, have you been to the shop? Have you phoned your mum? Have you had lunch? She's like, no. And I'm like, okay. Well, so I think
Have you slept?
Well, yeah, have you slept? And I think sometimes, having seen it with our kids with dyslexia, having seen it with other people with dyslexia, you kind of feel like you have to be able to do everything, like that would prove your worth and compensate for the areas where you don't feel so strong. But actually, nobody can do it all, and nobody is strong in every area. So it's kind of building the team and going, look, I bring this phenomenal vision and ability to have vision and pull the future into the present. I bring that to the table. So I need to build out the sort of the farmers around me. I need to build out the operational bit around me, but don't dampen that ability to go out and find the next vision, the next big step, because it's the hunting that actually brings the leaps of growth. It's the farming that then sustains the growth. So I think there's a place and a need for both. And for sure, there's days I tear my hair out, and I'm sure there's days, Jamie, your team are tearing their hair out. But that's the nature and challenge of us all being different and working together.
Completely agree.
I think I'm reminded by, I'm not sure, I think it was Ford, the car guy. He was having his biography written, and the biographer walked past one of his staff's door every day, and he sat at his desk with his feet up all day and just drank and hung around and did nothing, legs up all day. And he went to Ford and said, why is that? Like, Ford is the most efficient, systematic, the Elon Musk technical of the day. Everything was hyper efficient. Okay. And he said, I've just been looking through everything and everything's hyper efficient. Why is this guy sitting there doing nothing? So this guy had one idea that saved me $100,000 last year. And that would be the equivalent of 10 million, let's say. And I'm like, I'm quite happy to pay him for a whole year for one more idea. And I think sometimes what happens is you've got like little kids with dyslexia. Let's say you've got a little kid with dyslexia who's disappointing his teachers, disappointing his parents, disappointing himself sometimes. I'm talking from experience. And then one day there's a big problem in the household and there's a calamity of some sort and it's going to cost a fortune to solve or whatever. And he walks by and he goes, oh, why don't you do X and Y? And they do X and Y and it's solved. And then everyone goes back to normal and no one necessarily stops to think what a fortune that idea may be saved or made. And then he goes back to beating himself up because he can't do his there and there the right way around with this spelling or this or that or do the detail and so on. But he would have had to do admin systematically, perfectly for 2 or 3 years in a row just to make up the value of that one little idea. And how many little ideas has that wee man got? Loads of them. And I think so often with dyslexia, we diminish the value of a small idea at the right moment. And I think that is so valuable.
I was talking about Ford, isn't it? It's like the Henry Ford quote was, if I'd gone out and asked the people what they wanted, they'd have said faster horses. And that's before he built the motor car. So maybe that's the difference between the farmers and the hunters. We'd be building the faster horses, whereas the dyslexic visionaries are out there building the motor cars.
Yeah, I think it's also just quite interesting that how different it is today to the sort of the barrier to entry to bringing your ideas to life has now been reduced so much. And it is interesting to think like now that you've got Claude Code and it seems like it's no longer just something that the people who are sort of in the know use, and it's something that people are just becoming a lot more kind of au fait and familiar with. How many more of these ideas will just be brought to life, will be so much further along. So I do think it's obviously a scary time with AI. I've always kind of been quite keen on it, but at the same time, it still is scary, especially in the way if you're making software. To think like what's going to be happening in the next 2 to 3 years. But I do think that it is such a sort of leveler, and there's going to be so many more ideas that are going to come to life over the next 3, 4, 5 years. It does feel really exciting.
Tell us about Talamo. What does Talamo do, and how does it work? I've not ever used it. So give a listener an idea of how the screener works, because there's so many different ways of doing screeners. But how does your screener work for dyslexia in particular?
So for us, we wanted to take as close a view to the formal dyslexia assessment as possible and deviate as little as possible, but do it obviously in a fully automated way. So a formal dyslexia assessment takes 3 hours, and you have a practitioner opposite you who is taking you through a series of psychometric assessments. And these psychometric assessments have been tested on thousands of kids to make sure that you get a standardized score at the end of it. We've basically taken that same idea and we've created a 45-minute assessment, but we've just worked so hard to try and find the exact battery that you can get as many accurate results as possible on. So we have basically various different domains. We look at visual ability, verbal ability, auditory working memory, processing speed, phonological awareness, reading and spelling, which is a kind of condensed version of what you would get in a formal assessment. And then we've automated it. And it's meant that we've had to sort of remove certain interactions that you couldn't do on a computer and sub in for other things. So particularly for phonological awareness, we've had to use a lot of kind of pictures of things rather than getting children to pronounce sounds. And so essentially it's a 45-minute test that you log on and you take this assessment, and then it will give you a report at the end of it, which has got basically a separate report for a teacher, a parent, and a school SENCo with all of the next steps that you can take tied to the specific profile that a child has. And then in the background, we use obviously AI for the report to give you some extra contextual information. So whether it be, I think relative strengths are really interesting. So for example, if you're looking at ivvi, it might be that you get a recommendation if somebody has got a poor working memory and good visual ability. So it's the two things together that make it interesting. And so, yes, it's the actual kind of format of it is pretty simple, that you just take this assessment, but then we have a logistic regression that runs in the background that then gives you a risk of dyslexia, and it's about 95% accurate, and we over-reg it slightly we tune it up slightly to capture slightly more kids than we wouldn't, because it's better to get a false positive than it is to get a false negative. And then, so that's basically what it is. And the idea is that what we're doing now is we're building this maths ability test and this executive functioning test, but instead of it being kind of two disparate things, the profile of the child will just expand. So you'll be able to see all of this as one singular view of a child. And so
would they do the same? Would the test just get longer, or do you do it separately?
We would do them in different parts, just because you would get the child will get tired if they have to sit too long. And obviously
Understood.
The difference between doing it in one-on-one, I mean, even if you're doing it one-on-one, a 3-hour assessment is already, by the time you're getting to the final assessments, like you need to be thinking about whether or not the fatigue aspect is affecting the results. So for us, we kind of want to limit each section between half an hour and 45 minutes. But you can take them, you basically will be able to take each test either together or separately. So if you did the maths ability test, by the time you're getting the report, you're just seeing the maths ability and dyscalculia report. But if you do all of the three of them together, you'll then see a proper report, and the results will amend as we see more tests. So the validity will increase the more tests that you do. And our goal is basically to be as close to the accuracy of an educational psychologist as possible, whilst keeping the test for schools to be like 20 quid per child max. And so what this then gives you is just the ability to screen all of the kids at once, get to see the profile of the child. And instead of it being like what I had when I was at school, where you have like a parent who's an advocate and they are the one who basically gets you through, every child, the school basically controls the flow of resource management. and each child just gets their own report, and it can get sent to their class teacher, the SENCo, and the parent. And then from a school's perspective, what we're building out for next year currently as well is that you have this like cohort report. So you then start to manage like, okay, we've got these children who we think have got a similar profile. We recommend putting them in an intervention group together, and you could do this intervention with them for 4 weeks or something, and just trying to get as much more, like what we really don't want to do is like at the end of this, give a school sort of more problems. Like that's not our job, is not to kind of tell a school that they're not doing enough when we're already in a very stretched system. So our sort of like, if I could wave a magic wand, it would be to kind of eliminate some of these problems completely for schools. That our sort of mantra is that we want to be as accurate as possible, as affordable as possible, but also as actionable as possible. And that actionable one is like, accuracy was pretty hard to get, but actionable is even harder, because you need to make sure that in order for a school to take action on a particular profile or particular report, you need to make sure that you fully understand like how much money the school's got, like how much resource they've got, what intervention courses they've already bought into, because you don't want to just recommend them new stuff for the sake of it. Like if they've already got something that the staff are trained in, that's better. Like you don't really want to just be saying, if the report was just try a load of new information, if you're a SENCo who's got a caseload which is completely full and you're already like, oh, it's too much, that's just not, it's not good customer experience for them. So yeah, at the moment, we're kind of really trying hard to just get obviously produce the new test, but also then get as much data as possible from the school. So when they get the recommendation, it's then, it's a lot easier for them to just put it into practice.
Fantastic. That's really helpful. And do these children do them on their own, as it were, in the classroom? Is that how it works? How does it practically work?
They'll do it all together in like a kind of, it'll be like an exam setting. So they'll have a pair of headphones, but they can do it on a laptop or an iPad. And you just have it under exam conditions. And then the results would then feed back into the SENCo's like account, and they would be able to see at the end.
And do the children get told the results and the parents get told the results, or is it just within the school?
So the parents get a report for them as well. But to be honest, I would say 9 times out of 10, the results would get shared with the parents. But the discretion ultimately lies with the school. So it's whatever the way that, and actually schools are very sort of sensitive about the information they share back with parents. And the reason why we have a specific parents report and not just a general one is that a lot of the time schools will elect to not send some of the recommendations that we've been given in school, because they might decide that they don't actually have enough resources to do anything about it. And as a company, it's not really our job to tell a school what they can and can't do. It's ultimately, we're giving them a recommendation and they ultimately decide what they want to do with it. So the parent will essentially receive a report that has got things that they can do at home. And it would encourage them to speak to the school, but it won't be saying like, okay, the school is going to do 3 or 4 months of structured phonics intervention for this child, because that's what the school will decide. What we've got at the moment. Yes. Sorry.
Does it kind of tell do you know how sometimes schools are a bit kind of, they find it hard to talk about dyslexia in schools? I think a lot of schools, they would rather talk about learning differences or language or slow processing or whatever, and not actually talk about dyslexia. How does it work with the report? Is it like you've got a very high chance of dyslexia or a high chance of dysgraphia, or do you use that language, or is it a different kind of language?
So we would use likelihood of dyslexia. So we're not a formal assessment, so we wouldn't say you have definitively. But at the same time, we know that not every parent has got 600 quid spare to spend. So our policy is that if you never got an assessment, you could still rely on the results to put in place intervention. And I think it's difficult for us because we're in like 850 schools, but I would say that we probably are in a cross section of some of the most kind of pro dyslexia schools in the country. So I would say that probably our kind of customers are not a fair reflection on what, like, I would guess the average school would say. So I think that our customers are more kind of pro dyslexia. But I would say that it sort of depends. I think there are some schools which are nervous about wanting to label a child with anything, because it's almost like you don't want to accidentally give a parent a big stick to beat them with. And I think my first perspective on this, when I was coming from sort of like the perspective of the child and the parent, was more kind of anti-school. But then kind of coming at it from the other side, I speak to so many SENCos, and I just think that these people are like the unsung heroes of the education system, but they just don't get enough support and they just don't have enough resources. And so I think our sort of, obviously we have a parents product as well, but I feel like I personally view the way that our tool will be most impactful is that it's just something that the school is going to spend more time with the child than the parent will, in terms of like from an educational standpoint. And a lot of the time I feel that when the child gets home, they might not really want to be engaging a huge amount in the work afterwards. And the parents got their own relationship with the child, and it might not be as easy to kind of go through the homework or the classwork or whatever it might be. So I do think that the school is the primary mechanic in helping the child with education. And the parent can definitely help. But I think that if we manage to flip the schools into doing this, that's going to be that's going to produce the biggest outcome. But I think that in order for a school to want to do this, there kind of needs to be certain things that you can't do, which is like, one of them is like, you can't kind of make the situation worse for them with the parents. You can't just give them a whole load of extra stuff to do. And they've also very kind of reticent of like wanting to refer on but you can't give the impression that you're making like loads of money with this. I think people are in education for sort of a lot of the time altruistic reasons. And I think this is really like, they wouldn't want to feel like that you're kind of massively profiting off this. So it's a delicate balance, because I would also say that sometimes like the really kind of hard sort of sales push that we've had in schools actually goes down quite badly. And it's more of a kind of like softer piece to it. But I would say that generally the schools have been pretty encouraging of dyslexia, although with the new white paper that's been released by the government, it does seem that dyslexia hasn't had as much time in the sun as maybe other conditions.
Is this restricted to the UK, or are you open to doing it in America and so on? Because a lot of our listeners are in America and Australia as well.
So we're discussing doing a trial in Connecticut later this year in the US. But I think that the challenges with dyslexia is that there's just so many different sort of slight variations in the definition that I think if we were to go to America, we would have to make like a localized product, which we would be interested in doing, but it's a large amount of work. And also each state has got they're similar, but they've got slightly different sort of variations of how it's defined and the state standards and everything.
One of the things I'm really keen that this has been such a good conversation, Jamie. It's been brilliant, but we have taken a lot of your time here. But you were mentioning the SENCos, and again, it's sort of Talamo's commitment, isn't it, to supporting SENCos and supporting the work that they do. I suppose we should expand on what SENCos are for our listeners, but also that there is something really special that you're doing this year for SENCos out with the schools work.
Yeah, so SENCo stands for Special Educational Needs Coordinator. And in the UK, there is normally 1 or 2 people in a school who take this role. And their responsibility is basically to help the children who have a special educational need. So whether that be dyslexia, ADHD, autism, some kind of speech and language issue. But I think a lot of people in the UK at the moment are saying that there's a special educational needs crisis. And that is largely produced by, I think, COVID has sort of shown the strain of the education system, but also there hasn't been this strain hasn't been accompanied with any additional funding. And I think a lot of the people who are taking the strain are the SENCos. And so we've got a conference on the 10th of June at the London School of Economics called We Love SENCos. And it's all about trying to just appreciating SENCos. I'm hoping as many of them come as possible. We've got space for 400. And the idea is that we're running the conference at a loss, and we just want to make it as useful as possible. So it'll be things like kind of how to manage your caseload, what AI tools you can use to help, kind of policy discussions about what the SEN reform means for in a day-to-day in a school. So yeah, that's the plan. We'll see how it goes.
Brilliant. And we
Fantastic.
will put all the details in the show notes. So if you are a SENCo and you're listening to this, please, if 10th of June, if you can be in London, be there, because it does look like it's going to be a brilliant day.
And how can our listeners help you? What are you looking for right now? Who knows who's listening? What's the next thing? Give us a few asks.
Yeah, so I think you wanted to find out more, if you had a child who you think might be dyslexic, you could take one of our at-home tests to find out. We also have a parents course coming out, which we've recorded with a lady called Leah Belito, who's a newsround presenter, which kind of gives a lot of sort of tips and tricks for parents at home. And then we have our new tests that are coming out. So the executive functioning and the dyscalculia. And we also have a podcast. It hasn't been running as long as your podcast, but it's called Talking Dyslexia. And I host that with Alan Broom, who's the CEO of the BDA. So yeah, people could check that out too. But yeah, I think just in general, if people are sort of active in the dyslexia community, I'm on LinkedIn, Jamie Wace, we're always looking to connect to people who are also in the space, or follow Talamo at Talamo on Instagram as well.
Brilliant. And all of that will be in the show notes. So
Yeah, just
people
swipe
will
up.
know where to find it.
Yeah, just swipe up right now on whatever app you're listening to this podcast on, and we'll just put the blue hyperlink in there so you can jump to each one of these. We'll make sure they're all there. So Jamie, it's been great to speak to you. Thanks very much for joining us.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, loved it. Thanks, Jamie.
Till next time.
Bye.
Bye.